So we wanted to present a few questions. People wanted to give their thoughts or try to answer some of those questions. You know, ask other thoughts, questions, whatever it is, please. Anyone have anything to say? Sandra, do
you think that the reason that there isn't any arrest on the other side is that the numbers of men who are praying are so huge, so immense, that you couldn't just simply have a police person. You would literally need part of the Israeli army.
No, I don't.
No?
I don't. So the numbers are not immense like that, except on a few occasions. So on the 9th of Av, the numbers are immense. On Shavuot, on really any holiday, the numbers are huge. Or tens of 50,000, 100,000 people. Right. So when there's a Birkat Kohen, I mean, we're talking huge numbers. But on a typical day, even on a Rosh Chodesh, you're not talking numbers like that at all. So no, I don't think that's it. I think the answer is that I think that the Israeli police say to the women, why are you provoking them like this? Why are just go to that other side? Come on. Do you really have to do this now? We have so many more important things to deal with. Why do you have to do this? I think that's number one. And I think number two is there is an Israeli acceptance of unruly behavior that is just very hard for this American at least to understand. But it's part of a Middle Eastern mentality that, they'll calm down, it'll be okay. And that's just part of Israeli culture. I mean, anyone who spends any time in Israel knows that that's just part of Israeli culture. So I think that's the other part of it. One is, why are you bothering them like this? They're here every day. I mean, sort of implying it's their kotel more than it's your kotel, which is, of course, the problem. Right? They don't own the kotel just because they're there every day, but whose kotel is it? Right? So I think it's that, and I think it's this sort of Israeli acceptance of behavior that is not nice or even illegal.
But is there also a political element?
Oh, well, the political element, there's true. I mean, so I think those two things are true regardless of coalition politics, right? The fact that the ultra-Orthodox parties usually are willing to join any government that will give their yeshivot more money, right? Like, they're very open about what they want, and usually what they want is for their constituents to be taken care of. I mean, it's very clear what they want. So yes, I think it would be very difficult for a government to really crack down on that, or to change the rules of the kotel dramatically, because they would risk or almost guarantee that those parties wouldn't join their government. So my guess is that plays in somewhere. I don't think it plays into the minds of the local police, but I'm sure it plays into the minds either of the mayor or of the national politicians who just don't want to push the issue too much. Right, because those parties, right, you shouldn't think of the ultra-Orthodox parties as being right-wing. They're not right-wing politically. They protect their constituents, right, and they are very, very willing to join a left-wing coalition if it means that their constituents, meaning yeshiva students and their families, will be taken care of, meaning we'll get exemptions from the army and we'll get more money. So that, I mean, their needs are very clear. So yes, my guess is that plays into the quiet nature of the national politicians about this.
So you're saying that the Supreme Court is really the only recourse that the women of the wall have?
Look, I think that the Supreme Court is an incredible institution in Israel. I mean, the judiciary system, but the Supreme Court in and of itself is an amazing institution. I think short of the government saying enough is enough to the ultra-Orthodox parties, which I hope that will happen, but I wouldn't hold your breath for that to happen. But short of that happening, then the Supreme Court is probably, the stop of last resort. Yeah, I think so.
What about American pressure being brought there, the American Jewish community? Does that have any influence at all, do you think, particularly in this
I think when the Prime Minister gets, 50,000 emails from American Jews, I think that does make a difference, yes. But when push comes to shove, how far is he willing to go for American Jews when his government will fall? I mean, these are all theoretical. I mean, I have no idea what Prime Minister Netanyahu thinks about any of this. But I'm just saying, I know when the coalition, when the conversion bill came up, it seemed to me that he was very much affected by all the very bad press he was getting in the American Jewish press. I think he was affected by it. Does that really matter to him more than what Shas has to say? Than one of the the ultra-Orthodox parties in Israel, I would not venture to understand that. I don't know. So I think it does matter, but how does it weigh against those other internal political factors? I really don't know. Anyone else?
What happened with the rest of Israeli society? I mean, there is tons of secular Jews, right, in Israel who doesn't belong to.
So,
are they aware of it?
So my experience, and I can just tell you from my friends and my relatives in Israel, they don't see the Kotel as being theirs, and by and large, it honestly doesn't bother them very much.
Well, they don't care.
That for the people that I meet and for the articles that I read in Israeli newspapers written by secular journalists, they've given up on the Kotel, and basically they've also given up on Jerusalem. I mean, I have relatives who live south of Tel Aviv, and I lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, and they not once came up and visited. And so I would go down to visit them, and when I would say to them, "Oh, do you want to come to Jerusalem?" and they would look at me as if I had two heads. Why? Why would we come to Jerusalem? We don't feel comfortable in Jerusalem. So it doesn't bother them as much as we think it bothers them, and probably as much as it bothers us.
Well, do we look at it more, not only religious side, but also historical side for any?
No, I understand, but I'm not sure I understand it, but it doesn't bother them the way it bothers me. Again, I'm not sure I can speak for all of Israeli society, but I can say for the secular Jews that I know in Israel, it doesn't bother
But
them.
in that side, not about Kotel, but just, how they behave toward the women and what they're allowed to do. Just, if it's progressive society with equal rights,
Right.
that doesn't bother anybody either?
I think I would love for anyone else to answer too, but my friends would just say, well, don't go. They just shouldn't go.
One of the problems is that secular Jews in Israel don't vote in nearly the numbers that the ultra-Orthodox do. And the ultra-Orthodox
Well, they don't vote as a bloc, certainly. Right.
They don't vote as a bloc as their rabbis
That's
tell them to, because then the rabbis telling them.
Right.
But they don't vote.
But I don't think there's a sense among secular Israelis that there's, to them it's still, even with all the advances made, still everything's black and white. It's either you're religious or you're secular.
Right.
So there isn't a sense about secular Jews to want to protect or concern themselves with the rights of people who have spiritual needs and aren't ultra-Orthodox. That's just, there's such a minority of people who have any understanding of that. Even though, you think because you know people in Israel that are involved in, other than ultra-Orthodoxy, that there are people like that, but every time you see any of these shlichim that come here, these young emissaries, they have no concept. The typical average Israeli has no idea that there's anything other than ultra-Orthodoxy. Maybe they know that there's the Kibbutz Rugai, group or something, but they're not going to.
The national religious,
Yeah,
like the more Zionist, more moderate left-wing.
Right.
No,
But basically, they think that if there's a group of women who want to, not make trouble, but are interested in having some women rights, they think they're just some oddball group. They're not going to sympathize with them. They're not going to concern themselves.
It doesn't strike them as a visceral issue the way that we think of it. So, I totally agree with Rena, and I would just add, I think what we've seen, again, since '67, is a lessening of the power of the moderate Orthodox in Israel, which I think is a huge loss for Israeli society, and a strengthening of the power of the ultra-Orthodox. That certainly happened in terms of coalition politics, but that's what we've seen here. So a group of people, again, if the coalition, if the other parties got together and just changed the law, then they would change the law, and the ultra-Orthodox parties could be left out in the cold. But they can't, they don't get together to do that. So the question of why they don't get together to do that, I think they just have other priorities. I think Rena's right. They just have other priorities. It's not foremost on their minds, and they don't, I think they have a very hard time understanding why this is so important to us, because we don't even live there. Right? I mean, there are bigger things on the agenda, they would say. What about this? What about this problem? What about this problem? I mean, they have a hard enough time understanding, environmental issues in Israel, right? So Israel is, the usual idea is that on social issues, or sort of non-defense issues, Israel is a generation behind America, right? So on environmental issues, they are behind the United States in terms of consciousness raising, right? In terms of grassroots, right? They're definitely behind us, but they're catching up, right? But they have a long way to go, and there are definitely still a lot of Israelis who look at that issue and say, "Are you kidding? Our borders are not set. Our country's at war. And you're worried about the plastic water bottle?" mean, given all the problems, that answer is not hard to understand. Doesn't make it right, but it's not hard to understand. But we have certain things in America. We have, there are certain things we take for granted that Israelis just don't take for granted, or they can't take for granted.
Well, I think there's a big issue about there isn't any freedom of religion for Jews in Israel.
Right.
Which, Hadassah in a magazine about a year ago said, Israel is the only democracy where there's no freedom, where Jews do not have freedom of religion. And I think that is probably what disturbs us the most as American Jews, is that it is and I've only been to Israel 3 times. The one time I lived there for 6 months, and then I was there years later. And Judy would remember when we went with Rabbi Rosenbaum, and we had a prayer service from the synagogue in the back of the plaza. We were surrounded by the ultra-Orthodox. We were men and women, and that was as bad as if we were only women, because we were just breaking the law just as much. And we had a lot of, no physical things thrown at us, but I remember my nieces, we did have some things thrown at us on the women's side. We didn't have a Torah, and we weren't.
Right. And you weren't up close, you were in the back.
Well, and then when we were closer, there was probably some other women who were doing something, and things got thrown over, and dirt and feces and all that stuff. And I remember my nieces, who were not raised Jewishly, were just horrified. Like, how could people do that? That was 1996. And then when I went back in 2006, what was so striking was the women's side was half, I think, I don't know, a quarter of what it was even in 1996. And it was so striking. And that time we did have a service. We were further away. We were practically out the gate. And we actually weren't bothered.
There wasn't always a mechitza. I don't recall in 71.
There was a mechitza, right? And so it's actually really fascinating. So I read a story in researching for tonight, right? There was a mechitza since 1967, and right after the the question really is, was there a mechitza before that?
I don't know.
Hold on, wait. Okay, so there is a lot of debate about whether there was a mechitza at all ever before 1967. If you look at photographs, there are several photographs from before and really meaning before 1948, because from 48 to 67, Jews weren't allowed there, right? Because Jordan controlled it, and they didn't allow Jews to go there. There are no pictures of a mechitza. Men and women just prayed next to each other, close to each other, right? And again, we're talking about a much smaller space. After 67, there was a kotel put up. There was this unofficial group. There was a mechitza put up, right? Because this unofficial group said there needs to be a mechitza. And that group became the official group that sort of protects the kotel, right? And they're the group that is, I'm not sure what the right term is, but they're under the prime minister's authority. So that's how it operates now. But it was done, as I said, in my remarks, it was done in sort of classic Israeli fashion, in that there was no process. What should be the rules of the kotel? It's a very American thing. What's the process? How do we get from here to there? It just happened. Someone took the initiative and made it happen. And then all of a sudden, that's the way it is.
Nobody wrote the bylaws.
Nobody wrote the bylaws, right? No one took minutes for sure. They probably ripped up the minutes, right? That's just not the way it works.